All right, so today we are speaking about Parashat Tzav. Parashat Tzav. As we read this morning, it is clear that our Father has prepared a way for us to come into His presence. And I think it is always a challenge for us as believers. And how do we really enter into the presence of our Father, especially in a time like this, just before Pesach? So I thought of what to speak about today, and a scripture that came to mind is 2 Timothy 3:16. It says, "All scripture is breathed by Elohim and profitable for teaching, for reproof, setting straight, for instruction and righteousness, that a man of Elohim might be fitted, equipped for every good work." So I think a day like today is, firstly, just that scripture. All scripture is breathed by Elohim. How do we hear someone's breath? It is pneumos and theos. It is the breath of Elohim. That's the Greek. It is by keeping your ear close to His mouth. So it is in closeness in relationship that we can hear and we can get insight into what the Father is saying. And as we go along, we will find that this scripture is good for us. It's profitable for teaching. And when we have failed, remember the last song that we have sung? It's when we fail, when we are in sin, it is there for teaching, for reproof, and setting us straight, and instructions in the way, instructions in righteousness, that every man of Elohim might be fitted, equipped for every good work. So as we go down this road, the Father says in Deuteronomy 30, He says, "I have set before you choices. I've set before you today life and good, and death and evil." So it is for us to choose between life and death, and good and evil. Those are the choices. And it is not a once-off choice that we make this time of year and the rest of the year. It is business as usual. It is continual choices. It is choices that we shape our lives as we live our lives towards a life that's marked by obedience, from the perspective and the foundation of a covenantal relationship, and our mission and our goal is to see the face of our Father, to meet Him in our quiet times, to meet Him in the place that He has prepared for us. So then the goal for us in this time of our lives is Deuteronomy 30:20, that says, to love Yotevaveh, your Elohim, to obey His voice, to cling to Him, for He is your life and the length of your days, to dwell in the land which He swore to your fathers. So, this is the goal that we have before us, is how do we maintain the presence of our Father in our midst? And as if we can walk in a way that is pleasing to Him, which our hearts are pure and our hands are clean, then the presence of Adonai resides in the camp of Israel. But the moment there is rebellion, there is strife, there is division and all sorts of things, then it becomes a problem. So, our mission is to love Him firstly, and then to obey Him. And as a product of our love and our obedience, we will cling to Him, because He is the length of our days and He is our life. And the Father leads us in places of decisions. And as we are going through this life, every day we are making multiple decisions. Decisions in relationship, decisions in the way, in our workplace, in where we are at, playing in terms of leisure time, business. Every facet of our lives, there are decisions that we are making. And the decisions that we make is what our Father put before us. He says, "I have put before you life and death. Make a choice." That's what He's doing. And the life that we are busy with, it's got like climaxes, or perhaps the other way around, but there are points of decision in every day. And those are thresholds where you come to it, a situation builds up and you get to a threshold. We need to make a decision. Am I going to turn left, or am I going to turn right? And those are the thresholds that the Father puts before us, so that we can stand in that place and make an active choice for Him or against Him, for His ways, according to His ways, or against His ways. And that leads us into two directions, into the place of holiness, of set-apartness and life, or we will experience consequences of wrong decisions that ultimately leads us to death. So the first thing that we must say to ourselves is, in the lifetime of Israel, how did they live their lives from the Yam Suf, from the sea to the Jordan, that 40 years in the wilderness? What was that what stands out? What was the goal that the Father had set before them? And remember, it's not always an easy road. We need to say that to ourselves. It's not an easy road. The Father didn't call us to a leisurely time. He called us in this place in the wilderness to encounter the enemy, so that we can deal with the enemy in our lives. And the biggest enemy that we face is where? In the mirror. That's the guy. And he's the guy that's making decisions every day that can be either for life or for death. And as we live our lives and as we face the reality of the Word before us and we make choices for life, we will reach the goal of the presence of our Father in our lives continually. But as we make mistakes, the judgment, consequences of those mistakes will be for us, will be with us. And if we persist in those mistakes, and if we continually walk away from what the Father instructs us to do, ultimately it will lead to death. So, if we look at the set-apart life, as the Father makes us very clear in the walk in the wilderness, as Israel goes through the wilderness, through the Yam Suf, enter into the wilderness, the process that He has placed, the progress that they make, is clearly laid out for us. So we can use that as an example in how to live our lives, and how to live a life, that is pleasing to the Father. So that's our calling. So let's just begin here. We look at the thresholds that the Father placed before us, and what was the experience of Israel in this time in the wilderness. And we must be certain that they experienced many thresholds, many places of decisions that they had before them, that they had to make choices. And I think the choice that they had, the goal, the purpose for which they set off in the first place was to go to the promised land, to the kingdom. That's where we are going. Where are we going? Same place. Same place. We are heading off to the kingdom. And it sets us free. The idea is to set us free from a slave mentality that we developed in Egypt, in the sinful existence, into a mindset and a life that resembles the set-apartness, the holiness that the Father has for us, to establish in our lives a set-apart life fitting to the kingdom where the Father resides. So that's the purpose. And we see that in their experience, it started out with 10 plagues. The Father said, "You don't know me? Let me show yourself. Let me show myself to you." That's what His purpose was. He said to Egypt, to Pharaoh said, "Who is this Elohim that you are worshipping?" And the Father said, "Let me introduce myself." And Israel had to experience the first few plagues with Egypt because they forgot who He was. So the last plague, what was the last plague? Death of the firstborn. In that judgment, you can either have life or you can have death, depending on your choice. And it was open for Egypt as well. If an Egyptian heard that you can apply the blood of the lamb to the doorposts of your house, do you think he would have lived or do you think he would have died, the firstborn? He would have lived. It's a personal choice. So coming out of Egypt, facing the enemy at the sea, the Father says to Moses, "Stand still and see Yeshua, see the deliverance. You can just stand still and I will deal with the enemy at the sea." Going through the water, going through the sea, the next thing that you will encounter is the bitter waters of Marah. And what do we do with the bitter waters of Marah? The Father turns it to Etz is thrown in, a tree is thrown into the water. It turns to sweet water. They fight the Amalekites. The Father brings a miraculous victory for them while Moshe's hands are held up high. And then the rock that produces the water is revealed in their lives. They cleanse themselves for 3 days at Sinai. The word is given at the mountain, and they dwell with the Father in the wilderness. It's a process that the Father has put in place for them to grow into a realization of who He is and to change their lives accordingly so that the Ruach Adonai, the presence, the Shekhinah can be maintained in the camp and they live in peace. That was the purpose. So, what was the consequence? What was the result? Was it a failure or was it a success? What do you think? At the end of the 40 years, was this process, this intention, this thing that the Father has planned for them, was it a success or a failure? I think it was both. Because the first generation couldn't get rid of their slave mentality. And they had continual fear, they had continual challenges that they've placed before the Father. And the Father took them out of the picture, and the children went into the Promised Land. So it was a success. Israel reached the Promised Land, but not the first generation. They didn't reach the Promised Land. So I think what we can learn from Moses during this period is that after the golden calf incident, when it seems like they've hit rock bottom, the Father says, you will go to the Promised Land on your own, and I'm just not going to accompany you. And Moses said, Father, if you are not accompanying us, if you're not coming with us, if your presence is not with us, we are staying at this mountain. We are not going anywhere. And sometimes we hit a place in our lives that feels like rock bottom. And the place and the problem is not the biggest issue. It is, can we, in that situation, in a situation of deep darkness, can we seek the Father's face and have His presence around us, and then we will go out and we will go into the way that He has purposed us to go. So, there are decisions at a threshold. Now, I said to you, so our lives are going from threshold to threshold, and we make decisions. That is just the way we live our lives. And there's a word for that. And this word has got a strong presence in these portions, and it's the word suf. Suf, where we find it the first time, as far as I know, is there will probably be the first time in this period is with the revealing of Moshe in his basket in the reeds, because that is what reeds mean. Is suf. Suf comes from that word. So I think I would like to follow this line of thought, and what I did is I had a look at where this word comes from and where it occurs in Scripture, and just followed it. It's as easy as that. So what suf means is it's the rim or the lips of a bowl which circles around it. So this is a glass of water. Do you see it? How can I give this water to Andries? Can I give the water to Andries, or can I take the container and hand the container to Andries so that he receives the water? Now, this is the rim of the container. So, and that is what suf means. It's on the outside of this container, on the outside of the volume of water, there's a container. And that container has got a story to tell. So, and this is my life. My life is I'll get to it in the end, I'll just give you a preamble, is that I need to lay my life down, my body, I need to lay down as a living sacrifice. If I put my body on the altar, it's easy for the soul to follow. But my body is the one that experiences the world. All the impact of the world is placed on my body, and my soul responds, and then my spirit. Okay, so we'll get there. But a bowl is used for gathering things together, for eating, for consuming, it says. It is also the lips that we eat with, the lips of your mouth, where your language, your spoken word comes from. And it can be a blessing, it can be a curse. Also, the assembly is asufah, is an assembly. So we read in this portion, or is it the next portion, it says, the people that were on the outskirts of the camp. On the outskirts of the camp. That's usually where the problems were. Is on the lips of the camp is where the problems came, and the enemy enemy came, Amalek came, and they threatened the people on the lips. And the testimony of the camp was much determined from how you see the thing on the outside. And this is a lot like our experience in existence, is how do people perceive you from the outside, inward. That's sometimes an issue. Also, the reeds that grow on the edge of a river, that is the furthest edge of the water, of the land. We start encountering the water, and if you go through the reeds in the Nile, what is in the Nile? The crocodile. So the danger is beyond the reeds. So if you reach the reeds, you must know you're at the end of what is safe on the land. So I think it is all to do with the uttermost edge of our existence. And our testimony of our lives, our decisions, has got a lot to do with that. And this is for me as an individual, for us as a group. So how people perceive us from the outside, that is what it is. So what we are doing is, if we choose the way that leads to life, there is a place of testimony, and that is on the lips of the bowl. This congregation has got a testimony to the world outside. And even if you are remotely just a little part of that congregation, you've got a good testimony, then people will speak well of us. That we will be people will perceive us to follow the word of the Father and the way that we should go. But if someone has got a negative testimony and a person outside hears it, what is the perception of the community? Negative. So that's why each one of us has got a responsibility to each other to maintain a good testimony of what the Father is doing in our lives. And if we've got a problem inside of the bowl, what do? We turn around and we sort it out inside, and we clear the water so that we can go forward as a unified body. That's what we do. Otherwise we're in trouble. So let's just continue. This is, Israel is on its way to holiness as they are walking the road from Egypt to the Promised Land. And as we read last week or the week before, the end of Exodus, as you reach the end of Exodus, the tabernacle is built, it's been prepared. Moses is starting to erect the tabernacle according to the word of the Father. And then in the last chapter of Exodus, what happens? The presence of the Father comes and fills the tabernacle, to the point where Moses cannot stand or enter. So now we've got a challenge. We've built a place for the Father to dwell. We just can't enter into that place or communicate, interact with Him the way that it's purposed. So and this is the question of our lives, is how do we approach the most set apart Elohim? How do we approach Him and deal with Him in our lives so that it is a blessing to us and it is a blessing to Him according to His ways? And this is when the Father calls out. Vayikra. And He called. Who called? The Father calls. Outside, from inside the tabernacle, He calls to Moses and He gives him the instructions of Leviticus, or Vayikra 1, until where we are just now, in our reading of Tav. And what the focus of His words is the korbanot. It is the way to draw near. It's the sacrifices. So as we are drawing near, last week in the parasha of Vayikra, we dealt with the sacrifices from Israel's perspective. Everybody who brings a sacrifice, what the sacrifices look like, what they are, what they can't be. And this week, as we read through the Torah portion, it is how the priesthood deals with the sacrifices. How are they brought on the altar? So this is all to do with how do we treat the sacrifices so that our Father will be glorified in whatever we do in this tabernacle. The distinction between last week and this week primarily is who handles it. But there's another thing, is that this week it speaks about the sacrifices that are most holy. Have you seen it as we read through it? It says, this sacrifice are Kodesh Kodeshim. This is most holy, holy of holies. And you as an Israelite can approach the Father at the altar because this korban that you're bringing is Kodesh Kodeshim. It is like you're entering the most holy place for you as an Israelite. So, That was Parashat Tzav. And as we're carrying along and as we're working through living in the presence of our Father, and if we deal with shame in our lives, if there is something that's happening that is not according to His word, we bring a Korban Asham or a Korban Chatat, and we deal with things in our lives that needs to be set straight. If we are at peace with the Father and we want to celebrate that lifestyle, we bring a Korban Shlamim, a peace offering. That's what we bring, and we celebrate it together, most holy. If we want to glorify Him for the goodness that He has given in our lives and the ability to work and to plant and to harvest, we bring a Korban Mincha, a meal offering. If we just want to come before Him and glorify Him with everything you have, use a Korban Olah, a burnt offering. This is a way to interact and to glorify the Father in our normal daily lifestyles. And all of this points forward to the relationship we have with Messiah. But the next way, so this is the presence of our Father. How do we deal with this? We live the lifestyle. We worship Him like He tells us. Tabernacle structure worship. That's how we do it. But then we get to the places where we get to a threshold and we make a wrong choice. And we turn away from the Father because of challenges in our lives, because of relational challenges, of things that we desire that is not godly, that we turn away from, and we pursue something that our Father instructs us directly not to do. And then we find the consequences of our sin. And if we persist in it, if we walk away from the Father, it will end. The Scripture says that the portion of sin is death. So, there is consequences. But there is also forgiveness. And we see that picture from Egypt, from the place of Egypt. But before we get to Egypt, as Israel was walking, I don't know if you will be able to see this. As Israel was walking in the wilderness, remember I gave you some examples, 10 examples, 2 or 3 slides ago, at the sea, at Marah, where they failed in their decision making. They lacked faith crossing the Red Sea, the Yam Suf. They complained at Marah. They complained in the desert of sin. They collected more manna than what they were told to. They collected manna on the Shabbat. They complained for the lack of water at Rephidim. They were involved in idolatry at the golden calf. They complained for food this was when the outskirts, Numbers 11, 1 and 2, where the outskirts, the Erev Rav of the camp, complained about the lack of food, and the Father dealt with them with quails. Complaining over the lack of food again in 11 verse 4, and then failing to trust our Father, entering the promised land. I think those are the 10 failures of Israel, walking in the wilderness. And this ended up causing the death of the first generation coming out of Egypt, not entering the promised land. So the purpose is that the Father has given in your life and in my life to lead us through growth experiences. If we trust Him, if we follow Him, if we've got a relationship with Him and we walk after Him, it can lead to life, to the kingdom. If we turn away from Him and we persist in that way, being unhappy with everything that our Father brings to us, eventually we will end up like the first generation did. So, Hebrews 3 verse 7 says, "Therefore, as the set-apart Spirit says, today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. And as I saw in my wrath, they will not enter into my rest." And that was Israel. Remember, those were the people that applied the blood to the doorposts. Yeah. They died, yeah. So the people that trusted the Father in the 10th plague, who the firstborns that gained life in Egypt, they went through the Yam Suf, the enemy pursued them. All of this took place because they turned around and walked away from the Father and they died in the wilderness. But look what happens. And this is the positive slant on this. Plague 8. 8 is the number of new beginnings. There's a potential new beginning. Plague 8, the locusts. So what happens is Moshe goes to Pharaoh and he says, if you do not let my people go, the Father will bring a plague of locusts on you. So the east wind comes up, a strong east wind comes up and it blows a swarm of locusts into the land of Egypt. And then something happened to cause the Father in verse 19. And Adonai turned a very strong western wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Yam Suf. There's the word Suf again. It is to the outer edge of Egypt, so that not one locust was left within all the border of Mitzrayim. What happened? The only place in the giving of the plagues. What happened? You know what happened is Pharaoh, first and only time, he says, surely I have sinned against you and against Yotevaveh, your Elohim. That's what he said. And there was a respite. There was an opportunity for him for salvation. So I think we can see that the judgment and the salvation, there's something in the sea of reeds that we can learn. That word Sif means a place that judgment can occur or salvation. Your choice. That's where it happens. So, in Exodus 14, unfortunately, we see that the deliverance of Israel takes place at that same sea, and Egypt is judged to the point that they don't exist. The army doesn't exist anymore. So, all right. There's another example. Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, in chapter 4 of Daniel. He walks around in this beautiful city with the hanging gardens and its beauty all around. He lives on the bank of the biggest river in the area, and I can only imagine the beauty that he experienced. And he says, in pride, he says, is it not I who built this city? So, in the same hour, the thing was served, fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. And he was driven from men, and he ate grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, and his hairs grew grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. In his pride, he made a decision, and in that same hour, he was driven from men. And it's interesting that the word that's used is the same word, it's suf. But just the next verse, it says, and at the end of days, while he is in that position, while he is being judged, in the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes to the heavens, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and made him great who lives forever, and whose rule is an everlasting rule, and his reign is from generation to generation. What happened to him? He was restored. He was restored. The judgment that takes place is not a judgment without hope. It is a judgment for the purpose of restoration. If you are in a place that you feel judged because of your life, of the decisions that you have made, know that there is a potential of restoration around every corner. Every following decision that you make, it can lead to life or it can lead to death. Your choice. So, he cried out to our Father, and the restoration took place. Even Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. We see the same word also reads in Jonah's life. Jonah, the prophet Jonah, he realized on the vessel that he was traveling under the sea, they are going to sink, and he is the one at fault. And being afraid of heights, he says, I'm not going to jump, but you throw me into the water, because it is the Elohim of the heavens that's judging me. And as he was thrown into the water, the fish, was it the judgment for the fish that swallowed him, or is it what? That was salvation. Because as he, in this portion, as he was in the belly of the fish, he offered a voice of thanksgiving. And the word says, from the roots of the mountains, in the belly of the fish. And the moment he does that, it took a couple of days for him to get there, apparently. But the moment he does that, he's spat out on the dry ground. So the Father gives him a new chance to go and do what he was called for. So in Jonah's life, it is deliverance that took place because of the fact that he, in the most, I can't imagine such a place. In the belly of a fish with everything wrapped around it. Why do we have the detail of the weeds wrapped around his head? Why do we have that detail? It's interesting sort of detail. That's the last thing that would worry me if I'm in the belly of the fish. So I think it's a pointer to the experience of the judgment, the place of judgment that takes place. Do you know that there is a very special day in the calendar? It's called the 10th of Nisan. On the calendar it's today. This is the day that Yeshua was led into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. So where the authorities inspected him, the people looked at him, see if he is the perfect lamb. So this is the day in Egypt where a lamb is taken into your house. And I think it's a day where we can look at our own lives and see, is the evidence of the lamb that is taken into your house? It's real? Is it real? Is the lamb taken into your house? Or are you just walking along with other people? Because the moment you take the lamb into your house, there is a circumcision of heart that takes place. And your life starts to change. And if we are battling with ideas, with decisions that we make that's continually in the wrong direction, we must start to think about this. What is the evidence of your life? How does other people from the outside in view you, view your life? Is your heart circumcised? Are you living the life that the Father has called you to live? Because the purpose of this lamb that is taken into your house, he lives with you for 4 days. What is the purpose of this lamb? What is the reason he's taken into your house? Is so that you can put the things, identify with the things of death that's in your house, so that that lamb can resemble the life for the death that you are owed, that your life is owed. So it's it. These 4 days from today until Pesach are crucial days. And if there's anything that you can remotely think of to sort out that needs to bring us back to the place of shalom, this is the 4 days. So that's the good news. Today is the 10th of Nisan. So the question remains, are we fully prepared for Pesach? I'm not talking about buying the lamb and doing all of the grocery shopping and getting everything right. That's important, but that's just a symbolic preparation that follows the preparation of your heart and your life. Matthew 5:23 says, if then you bring a gift to the altar, and there remember at the altar, remember that this is not the 4 days. This is the end of the 4 days. If you come to that point and you remember that your brother holds whatever against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first, make peace with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. So, don't take this lightly. This is an important point. Because for us, as we are making this walk and towards a deepening relationship with our Father, we must view our lives now and compare it to where we were last year this time. Are we making progress? Are we standing still? Are we walking up and down the fence, refusing to make a decision? Or are we opening the gate of a threshold that's in your life and entering into a deeper presence of our Father? Because there is a possibility of repentance. Teshuvah is available for our lives. Because if you find your life in sin, if you have made some wrong decisions in your life and your heart is not circumcised, where do you find yourself according to Deuteronomy 28-30? In not so much of a blessing. It's more in a place of cursing. And that, if you persist in it, will lead to a captivity. It will lead to being taken captive further on, which leads to slavery, which leads to destruction. Death is the portion of sin, the word says. But in this time of Pesach, there is in the 4 cups of Exodus 6 to 8, the restoration, redemption, deliverance, and sanctification is made available for us. And if you find yourself in a difficult situation, remember, if you see the fruit of your life and you think that it's not so much blessed, go and ask the Father for where you are at. Because if there is cursing in your life, remember, sanctification is the answer. Drawing closer into the presence of our Father, that's the answer. If there is captivity in your life, remember, the deliverer is one who will bring the answers. If there is slavery, redemption, and if you experience destruction, restoration. From the Father's viewpoint, and this is why this was always with me, or not always, but for a long time it was with me. Why is the cups, the 4 cups, Exodus 6 to 7, exactly in the other order of what we see them under returning? They're in the complete different order than this. It starts, the cups in Exodus says sanctification, deliverance, redemption, and restoration. It's the other way around than what it appears. If we approach the Father, if we're in sin and we approach Him, we are coming for the reason of restoration. The first step that we can make is to be redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Then we are delivered. We are going through a life of deliverance, walking through different thresholds in our life, reaching sanctification, being sanctified more and more and more. So why is it exactly in the other way around? It's because the Father responds to where we are in sin. Sanctification is the focus. Deliverance, or actually sanctification, if you read Exodus 6 and 7, it says sanctification, deliverance, redemption, and restoration. From His point of view, helps us to come out from the perspective of being in sin. So from His perspective, He deals with the end state first, is be holy for I am holy. We cannot be in a relationship if that's not the case. And you are going to be holy if I deliver you from certain things in your life. And it starts with redemption, but you must be prepared to have your life restored. And then we can walk in the way that the Father has for us. So, let's just proceed. We've spoken about the thresholds in the wilderness, that the Father calls us to walk towards holiness. In the wilderness, we do encounter the enemy. We know that for a fact. We see that all over. But the goal is to live a life in the camp so that the presence of the Father can be with us. But we do make mistakes, and judgment is what happens. So let's just look at the next portion. Exodus 2, this is the revealing of the Savior. In Exodus time, in the time of Egypt, Israel in Egypt, Moses was found at the edge of the river in the reeds, which was his humble beginning. Okay, you agree? And his life, I won't go through his life, but he grew into a man that ended up at the burning bush. That walked by shepherding his sheep. He looked, he saw a bush, and he turned and he went there, and the Father called him. And eventually, in the time after the plagues and everything else happened, at the sea, Moshe stood in front of a nation of people and he said, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the Yeshua, see the salvation of Yotevavhe, which He will bring for you today." This is the life, this is the example of a life from a place where you were pushed out and judgment was. The Father took you into His hand, brought you into relationship, and you grew in stature because of the right decisions and in relationship with Him. So, the road to holiness is, you look at our own lives. For us, how's the Messiah revealing Himself to us? We see that in our own lives, that in the outer skirts of your life, you meet the Messiah. And He comes into your life and He becomes part of your expression. And we enter into a covenantal relationship with the Father. You start to develop and to recognize the Word and the judgment, salvation aspect of what the Father brings into your life. And as you develop a life of worshiping the Father and you draw close to Him, obedience will be your evidence of your life. And as you grow, the Father will expose you to enemy. At Rephidim, at various places in the wilderness that we live, you will meet enemy. That's what it is. And we do in our lives in this day. But how do we respond? This is what the Father is interested in. Not whether you conquer the enemy, but how do you respond in your life? He says that bitter water. And water is the things that we live with. And if you're dry and thirsty and you get to, like they did, get to a place where water is placed in the wilderness, then when it's bitter, disappointment can set in, resentment and negative attitudes, as we saw the example that they did. But remember 1 Corinthians 10 says, to the last generation, I do give these examples of the fathers to them so that they can make the right choices. So as we are presented with bitter waters, what do we do to sweeten the waters of bitterness in our lives? What do we do? What did they do? They took the example of an etz, of a tree, and they threw it into the water, and the water turned sweet. So we know that there was a price that was paid for us on a tree. And we know in Isaiah it speaks of the tree, the stump, a netzer, a branch from the tree of Jesse. If we are focusing on what Yeshua has done, the bitterness of the water that we experience in our life will be turned to sweet water, and it will bring life and light. So, 3 days at the mountain, washing yourself. We need to cleanse ourselves from our own desires and the things that we do that is against our Father. And if we hear His word, we must be filled with faith, come into action, build the tabernacle that our Father has called you to build in your own life, and live a life of sanctification. So the experience and the example that we see in the lifetime of the wilderness of Israel, those points exactly can fit your life and can equip us to live a life that can facilitate the presence of the Father in this world. And remember, we said the wilderness that they lived in is the ideal place for the presence of the Father. That's where He was comfortable with before the foundation at the foundations of the world when it was created. Choshek al Panei Hamayim. The darkness that dwelt on the face of the earth, the Spirit of Adonai was dwelling on the face of the waters. So the wilderness area, if we experience wilderness, it's an ideal place to encounter the Father. That's where He brings you to speak with you. So we know the boundaries of this wilderness is from Joshua 4:23 says, the boundaries is the same. There is a supernatural thing that happens for the opening of the Sea of Reeds. There's an opening that He can only organize at the opening of the waters for us to come into the wilderness. That is when we enter into a relationship, covenantal relationship with our Father. But before we go into the promised land, the Yarden, the river must be opened again. So there are 2 occurrences of waters that are opened for us. That's not our responsibility. The Father does that for us. This is when we come into a relationship with Him, and when we die and we go to the promised land, or when He calls us and we go into the promised land. That's a supernatural occurrence that the Father brings about in our lives. But we must prepare our hearts and our lives right here, right now. That's our responsibility. So, in this wilderness, what we are now, we encounter the enemy and we go through thresholds. That is our responsibility. How do we do it? And the best thing that you can do is, if you want to be, don't look in the mirror. Even mirrors can compliment you in ways. You just do this and the mirror looks better. Ask your wife. Ask your husband, how am I doing this year? Do you think I'm growing? Do you think I'm growing in terms of my spiritual life? The way that I respond, the way that I live. Do you think This year I've got a better testimony in living out the principles and the word of our Father. Am I closer or am I going further? That will be a more realistic answer that you get than trying to judge it for yourself. Because we do make mistakes in looking at ourselves. And the evidence of this is, how do you handle it when you need to make a crucial decision now? Don't contemplate the answer. You're confronted with the situation now and you need to make a decision. That is when all the inner workings of this machine, that is, all the muscle memory kicks into place and you make a decision and you respond. And that's usually an indication of what's going on underneath. What's happening? Where are you at? So, as in a time of preparation for Pesach, we need to go through these tests. And you know, when an oil pipe is being tested, you know how an oil pipe is tested? At much higher pressure than it normally operates at. And that's when one can see the evidence of healing or the evidence of problems. So, our last slide or two is, through our lives, we are heading inwards towards the set apartness of our Father. We are dealing with our experiences, the things that are on the borderlines, on the edges of our existence, and it's like an onion that's been peeled. We go through the hard layers first, and the Father takes us through decisions that you make to lay aside the things that is contrary to Him. And as we are going closer and closer into the Holy of Holies, the innermost place of the tabernacle in your life, it happens in every facet of your being. It happens in your work situation, in the way you are doing the things that you enjoy, relationships, every area of your life. There is dealing with thresholds, with decisions that you must make to get your heart to a place that it is pure and your hands to a place where it is clean. And that's where we want to be. We are now entering the first appointed time in this cycle, in this year's cycle. Pesach, first appointed time. And this is a dedication to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Whatever happens in this house resembles what's on the door. Is my life a resemblance of the life? Remember, the life is in the blood. Is my life inside a resemblance of the life of the Messiah? The Messiah. I'm inside the house. I'm having the blood of the lamb on the outside of my doorpost. Whatever is outside must resemble what's inside. So, is it life or is it death? And only you can answer that question, and only I can answer it for my life. So, it's interesting that Romans 12:1, this is the last slide. Romans 12:1 says, I call upon you therefore, brothers and sisters, through the compassion, important word, through the compassion of Elohim, not through the judgment or any other thing, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies, that which interacts with the world daily, mostly, to present your bodies a living offering. So how does that change? What's different to that offering than the offering that is put in the altars of the tabernacle? This one is still around tomorrow. So it is a living offering. As I'm drawing near continually, but I'm laying my values, my desires, the things that pushes me away, I'm laying that down. To be set apart, well-pleasing to our Elohim. And if you do that, you can pat yourself on the chest and say, this is just your reasonable act of worship. Nothing special. That is just your reasonable worship. That's what we should do. That is what our lives should be. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So if the verse 1 has happened, if you are in the process of laying your own things down, that's your reasonable worship. Now, be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that we can act according to what we know to be good, well-pleasing, and perfect will of Elohim. So it is a process that we are growing into. We are coming closer and closer to the perfect desire of the Father in our lives. It starts here today at the 10th of Nisan, in preparation for Pesach, that is where the blood is signified on the doorpost of your heart. But it starts here. It actually started way back when, but for this cycle now, 10th is very important. So, Father, we lay our lives down and we surrender whatever there is that sets itself up against your will and purposes in our lives. And we come and we say, let your perfect will in our lives be done. So, first thing is to present your body, the things that are most easily tainted. Become a living offering, and in so doing, our interaction and our knowledge of the Father will increase. So I pray that this year, now this Pesach, we will encounter the Father to a way that we will know His good and His pleasing and His perfect will for our lives. Don't take this year lightly. The intensity of our life experience in this world is it's going in a direction that I think the seriousness of this days is increasing tremendously. If you look at the world around us, we are sort of going out of control. Not out of control, in full control of where the Father takes us. But the times are increasingly getting more difficult because of wrong decisions that we as humans make. It's something of our own doing. The Father foreseen that, and it's just happening the way He said right from the very beginning. The Father knows the end from the beginning. So, as this year's cycle of festivals, remember Psalm 23 says, I will lead you in the paths of righteousness. That word path is the word magal. It is, I will lead you in the cycles of righteousness. The cycles are the Moedim, these festival cycles, that you are drawing closer and closer and closer to the heart and to the mind and to the will of the Father. So, let's just participate in this to the best of our ability. Deal with the things that needs to be dealt with. Be ruthless in your love and compassion. Because it is in compassion that the Father says that we should draw near. If you are dealing with other people ruthlessly, you must do so in love and in compassion for the reason of light and life, not judgment. That's the wrong direction. You agree? So, Father, as we enter in this, we're standing on the threshold today, making decisions. Father, let our decisions result in knowing your perfect will and desire for our lives. Help us to be completely transformed in the image of the Son in this life, by your mercy and grace alone, Father, nothing of our doing. But help us not to place a stumbling block on our own lives that can stop us from making progress in this road. Help us, Father, to encourage and support one another in this way, so that your will can be done in this group, in this congregation. And so we can be an example, we can be an instrument in your hands to shine the light of the kingdom in the area that we live. Help us, Father, not to speak words and be involved in actions that can taint the experience of this group standing on the edge or the perimeter of this group. But help us to, in every way and in every time and in every occasion, speak your life and light of what you are doing in our lives. Father, we thank you and we praise you for the road and this derech that you are taking us. Help us, Father, to open the gates that is in our lives and that are closed. Help us to find that key, to unlock the lock that's been closed for so many years, so that we can make progress in the way that you are calling us. Help us not to become stationary or complacent, but that your compassion and your love burns in our hearts. And so the love that you've placed in us, we will show to the people around us. Help us, Father, to love you ruthlessly. We thank you and we worship you in the name of your Son. May our lives resemble the image of the Son. That's why we pray in your name, is that may the Shem, may your character be shown in our lives, in the words that we use, the actions that we do, and the way that we walk, in every occasion. We praise you and we worship you in the name of Yeshua, the one whose blood was made available for us from the foundation of the earth, before the foundations of the earth was laid. We praise you and we thank you. Amen.